Hi guys, my name is Shayda Campbell and this is an 11th apartment video. Today's tutorial is all about printmaking. I've prepared a two-part video tutorial in which we'll be using block printing supplies to carve a large block print or to make a large stamp. In this video, the first video, we'll go over all the supplies and then we'll talk about designing the stamp and then we'll get into the technique of carving the stamp. Then, in the second video, we'll talk about printmaking and all the cool ways in which you can use this stamp to enhance your hand lettering projects. I really think this is a great way to decorate the page before you begin a lettering project. So let's get started. Okay, let's start by talking about the supplies we'll be using for this craft. So the initial portion of the project is the design of the floral wreath, and for that you'll need graph paper and tracing paper, as well as a pencil with a good eraser. It's always good to have scissors and a ruler, and then you'll want a couple artist pens with different tips. So I've got a fine point and something just a little larger. And the second portion of the craft will be the carving of the printing block. So of course you're going to need something to carve. And this is printmaking or stamp making material. Traditional block cutting would have also been called lino cut. And lino cut or linoleum is a really hard surface that's often mounted on a wooden block. That's not what you want to start with because it's harder to carve and it takes a lot of practice. What you're going to look for when you go to the art store is this sort of soft, flexible printmaking material. And you can get any kind. There's all different ones. Speedball Arts makes a couple. One is called Speedy Cut and the other is called Speedy Carve, and those are both great. But if you ask any employee at the art store and tell them you just want, some flexible printmaking material or a printmaking sheet, I think they'll be able to help you out at most art stores. To transfer the design on there, you're going to use graphite transfer paper, and the brand that I like, or actually the only brand that I've found that actually will transfer the design onto this material, is Speedball's Mona Lisa graphite transfer paper. So pick up some of that if you can. And you'll also want a couple of little pins to help keep your design in place while you transfer. And then once we get to the actual carving, you'll need a carving tool. And this is by Speedball. And these are sort of the standard, and you'll find them at most art and craft stores. They have a removable head or blade, and this is the smallest blade. It's kind of like a little shovel, and it shovels away the block. So let's see here. In the handle are all the different blades, and all those different size blades are just good for carving away and doing different detail work. It's also good to have an ink pad to test out the design. And the last thing you'll want to have is a cutting board or cutting mat like I have, and that's just so you have a work surface and you don't have to worry about cutting your table. So we'll start today by talking about the design of the wreath. Now, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail today. If you need help, I do have a video on my channel all about drawing flowers and creating these beautiful floral wreaths. So in that video, I go into a lot more detail, and it's called Floral Wreaths or Floral Design and Pretty Quotes. So do check that out if you need help. But I'll just quickly let you know what I've done here. I love working on graph paper because it helps me keep things straight and balanced and symmetrical. And I start by drawing that straight line down the middle and then doing my form around it. So here I've done an oval. Then I sort of map out where I want the flowers to sit, just using these circles, and that just kind of gives me an idea of where I want to put the leaves, where I want to put larger flowers. And then from there I go on and I start practicing drawing little buds and leaves and flowers, and I'll do a bunch of rough copies. And for me, the next step in the process is to trace my rough work. So I take my rough copy of the wreath and I trace over it, and that allows me to capture what I really like about my design and to change what I don't. And then inevitably that initial trace goes sort of off the rails, and I trace that work, keeping what I love and getting rid of or changing what I don't. And then I find that really works for me. And during the design process, it helps to hold your design up to a mirror, or if it's on tracing paper, to flip it over. And that will sort of trick your mind into looking at the design with fresh eyes, and you'll be able to see any problem areas. If it's lopsided, if it looks a little funny, you'll see where the flaws in the design are, and you'll be able to fix them. All right, we have our wreath design. So now what we're going to do is transfer it, and we're going to transfer it onto our block. Now this is a really important step. We're going to flip the design over because we want it to print the way we've designed it. And of course that means we need to carve it in the reverse so that it prints out as planned. So flip that over, put your transfer paper on the block, dark side down, and we're just going to make a little sandwich with that and pin it down. Use those pins to keep the design straight and steady. And then you're going to take a sharp pencil, maybe a mechanical pencil, and trace over every line. It needs to be quite a firm trace. You don't want to rip through the paper, but you do need to press on it, and that should transfer the design onto the block. Now don't be disappointed if it's a little bit faint. It's just difficult to transfer onto these printing materials. But what you're going to do now is you should be able to see it at least enough that you can trace over it with a ballpoint pen. Do make sure it's a ballpoint pen, just like a Bic, and that'll help you to really see it clearly for the carving process. And if you can't find a transfer paper that transfers the design, the one other option you have that will work is to cover the back of your design in graphite. So take your pencil, scribble all over the back of the design, lay it down, and then transfer it the same exact way by going over it with a sharp pencil. So I'll just continue on and do my whole design here. And when I'm finished tracing in pen, it's time to carve. So I've transferred my design onto the block using my ballpoint pen, and it looks good. Now I can see what I'm doing. So don't try to carve off of that initial transfer. Do go over it with a ballpoint pen. Before we start carving, I want to talk a little bit about how to carve and just get into these tools a little more. When you buy the Speedball carving tool, it will come with all those different blades in the handle. And they're just numbered from the smallest, which is a 1, up to the largest, which is a 5. And then there's like a weird cutting blade that I think is a number 6 or something like that. I've got 2 handles here, and I just bought an extra one simply because then I don't have to switch out the blades as often. And that's nice if you're doing a lot of carving. Now let's talk a little bit about the block. So as I said, you want to get something that's flexible and easy to cut. That's just great for someone who hasn't done this a lot. This is the traditional material, the lino block. So this is a very hard surface which is mounted on a wooden block, and you can also find unmounted lino. Even I find this really difficult to carve, and I find it difficult to print as well. And it's something that I want to get into, but it's not a beginner's medium. It's really tough. I haven't successfully carved any lino. But these more flexible materials are perfect for beginners like you and I. And these are just some different materials that I've picked up. This thick stuff, the pink and the white, is all from Speedball. One is called Easy Cut and one is called Easy Carve, and they're both great for this project. And you can also find thinner flexible sheets, and that would also work well for this project. A lot of times craft stores will carry the Speedball stuff and art stores will carry stuff like this. And I don't know, really, I haven't seen a huge difference. You can go with either medium. So I'm just going to show you quickly here what the tools can do. Let's start with the number 1. You're just going to dig in to the block and then create nice smooth cuts like that. And I'll show you with the number 2, which is a little larger. It just kind of shovels out. And as you work with this, you'll find the pressure that works well for you. You might want to practice a little on the corner or on an off-cut piece. I'll take this out. You just twist the head there. Just take it out like that by twisting the handle and loosening up the parts in there. And then I'll put in a number 5, which is quite a bit bigger. You just slip it in like that, and twist to tighten. And then you can see the number 5 is like a shovel. It just takes out a huge section of that block. And that's good for clearing away the edges and large areas. Okay, let's start working on our carving. Okay, so I've started carving and I'm just working away, and I'm thinking I want to give you as many points as possible about the actual cutting or carving process. So the first thing to think about is that you want to do smooth, shallow cuts. The problem with going too deep, and I'll show you here on the side over here, is that when you're going along, at first it's fine, and then you kind of get stuck. Your blade goes underneath the block, and you sort of have to rip the printing material to get your blade free. And then what can happen, of course, is that you end up, you could potentially end up ripping into your design, and just it gets out of control. So smooth, shallow cuts are best. Another point is that I'm using a number 2 blade. That's sort of my favorite, my go-to blade, because the number 1 is more for very small detail work. It's quite small. And the number 2 I find is great for going around the perimeter of the design. It's just the Goldilocks. It's not too big and it's not too small. It's just right for doing the perimeter of the design, but also for doing detail work here, like the blades or the vines or the veins on the leaves. So I like the number 2 blade, but you'll test them all out and I think you'll find what you like. Now for these flowers over here, the way I create the X in the center is I do 4 cuts. So I start with one small one, then I turn the design around to face me again, and I cut into the other side of that cut so that they both have a nice smooth end. Then I do one more small one towards the initial cut, and then I finish it. So you're always sort of cutting into the center so that you get smooth points at the edge. And here I'm using the number 5 blade to cut away and clear out this middle section, just doing big but still smooth and shallow cuts, getting rid of all that excess printing block. And there I'm pretty nearly finished, and I think the design looks good, and there's only one way to know. Now that we're pretty much done with our carving, we need to ink it so that we can see where there's any problem areas and mistakes. But overall, I think it looks pretty good. So I'm going to reach for my ink pad here and test out my design. I really can't see the difference between what I've carved and what I haven't, because the block is all the same color on the surface and inside. So I'm going to press it as hard as I can. I'm going to move it all around, press it into the ink, and then now I can see, okay, there's a little, some little chunk there that I missed, and I'm going to look at twigs and leaves, and I'll see if anything needs to be smoothed out. Just perfecting my design, and having the black ink on there really helps me do that. So I'll pick up my carving tools again, get rid of all those little mistakes, but we're pretty much at the end of the carving process at this point. Okay, so I've finalized my design. I've gone and I've done some X's in the middle of the flowers there, and I've shaped the leaves and shaped some of the flowers as best that I can, and just tried my best to use the ink on there as a guide for all my problem areas. Now I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to cut all along the perimeter of the wreath so that I basically create a stamp that I can use. So it's not going to be a printing plate, it's going to be more of a stamp. And I'm also going to cut this design into 2 pieces. So I'm going to go right through the middle there, and I think that'll make this a lot easier to use. So I'm going to make long, smooth cuts. And first I'm just working to get rid of as much of that block as I can, and then I'll go back in later and cut away little details. This is really fun to do. It's great to see the block just go away. And now I'm going to cut through the middle here, and I have to be really careful not to cut into my design. So I'll just start on this side, and I'm going to make one long cut. There we go. And it looks good. And now on both the left and the right hand side, I've got a piece that I've got these, areas that fit together. So even though I'm going to cut away the rest of the middle, I'm going to be careful not to mess with that because I want them to fit together on the page so that when I'm printing, it works. And there you can see, I think it turned out really well. And I kind of can use the two pieces as a guide that works together when I'm printing. Okay, this is a big project, but we are almost down to the final step. We need to just test our design one more time. So I'm grabbing out that ink pad again, and I'm going to print, do an initial print on just some white paper here. I'm pressing as hard as I can into the ink, and then again pressing really hard on the back of that stamp to ink it onto the page. And I'm going to fit the two pieces together, and then I know this isn't going to be perfect because it's just stamp ink and we're not using proper printing paint or ink, but I think it looks pretty good. Again, I'll look for those last little problem areas, and that's it. Our design is finished and we have a lovely piece that's ready for printing. Well, thank you so much for watching today, guys. If you enjoyed today's video, as usual, please don't hesitate to hit like and subscribe. And don't forget, the second part of this tutorial is available this week, so you can find it on my channel right away. Whereas this video was all about the carving and the design, in the second video we get into how to ink the plate, how to ink the stamp, and all the cool ways that you can use these stamps, whether big or small, to enhance your hand lettering projects. I think they're great for adorning cards and envelopes and all those wonderful things that we love to make for our friends and family. So please check out that video, and I will see you next week with a new video all about a fun new font that I've been working on. Thanks for watching.